Greetings, taxable assets, or should I say, collateral damage. If you are hearing the sound of a heavy, iron-bound file slamming onto a metal desk and the miserable, viscous trickle of synthetic sludge being poured into a mug, it means you have tuned your Voxcasters to this frequency. You are either scheduled for a mandatory performance review, or you possess a deeply morbid curiosity regarding the catastrophic mismanagement of imperial resources.
Stir. The red light is flashing. I believe we are broadcasting to the civilian populace now.
I'm well aware of what the red light means, Scrap. I am forced to sift through a monumental pile of garbage today. The civilian contractor organization known as On Tabletop has forwarded us this unmitigated disaster of a battle report. The title alone gives me a migraine. Read it. Read the file name they submitted to the Department of Analytica.
Right away, Senior Auditor. The file is titled, The Fight for the 500 Worlds Continues. Dash, Necrons v. Ultramarines 40k and 40-meter Warhammer battle.
Ugh. It is a title utterly devoid of professional indexing. The archival systems will struggle to categorize a string of sensationalist buzzwords. It is just offensive to the ledger and my assigned task. My punishment for whatever administrative sins I committed in a past life is to cross-reference this On Tabletop video against my own immaculate, mathematically perfect, painstakingly compiled audit titled War for the 500 Worlds, Ultramarines versus Necrons.
It is a very thorough audit, sir. Almost, dangerously thick.
Because it has to be. I am forced to compare flawless strategic geometry against the gloss-brained actions of two commanders who treat heavy armor like disposable income. But before we even get into the kinetic and fiscal bankruptcy of the battlefield, we must address the stakes.
Yeah.
Illuminate the listener on the so-called wager these commanders engaged in.
Yes, Senior Auditor. According to the transcripts, the Ultramarines commander Steve and the Necrons commander Michael agreed to a wager of exactly 500 jelly beans.
I just want the listener to really absorb that.
Yeah.
500 jelly beans.
Furthermore, sir, the penalty for tactical failure stipulates that the loser must hand-feed these processed sugar confections to the winner, who will be lounging in a fabricated recreational basin, a kiddie pool, as the civilian vernacular describes it.
This is frivolous civilian asset mismanagement at its absolute nadir. We are talking about the deployment of ancient venerated war machines.
Yeah.
We are talking about the tactical application of Godhammer-Lass cannons and doomsday arcs, weapons capable of turning a hablock to slag, and they are wagering processed sugar in a plastic tub.
The caloric value of 500 jelly beans is roughly 2,000 calories, which, in an underhive, that is a king's ransom, sir.
But in the context of an intergalactic war simulation, the stakes are profoundly disproportionate to the simulated carnage. It makes a mockery of the Adeptus Astartes operational budget. The 500 worlds of Ultramar represent the pinnacle of human organizational capacity. Macrog, the crown jewel, is a fortress of unparalleled efficiency. The Primarch Reboot Gilliman literally wrote the Codex Astartes to ensure that every bolt shell, every drop of promethium, and every Adeptus Astartes life is spent with maximum return on investment.
And the civilian contractors from On Tabletop are simulating the defense of this glorious realm for the prize of artificial fruit flavoring.
Exactly. It is an insult to the sheer fiscal weight of the munitions expended. We will not be engaging in such childish wagers here. We will be executing a rigorous, unyielding examination of the ledger. Let us commence the pre-deployment audit. Open the operational roster scribe. Let us examine the theoretical combat power before it is squandered.
Opening the ledger now, sir. We begin with the Ultramarines, deployed under the operational doctrine of the Bastion Task Force. Looking at the core rule constraints, the detachment rule for the Bastion Task Force explicitly states that it allows battle line units to advance and still perform actions like terraform.
Stop right there. I need to take a sip of this recap. Gah. Vile. Absolutely vile. Now listen to me, you civilians out there. Let me translate this civilian rules jargon into stark financial terms. This rule is not merely about moving faster.
It affects the action economy, sir.
The action economy is everything. Normally, if a unit sprints across the battlefield, what we call advancing, they forfeit their right to perform complex logistical actions, such as securing objectives, calibrating telemetry, or in this specific mission, terraforming the sector. Advancing an average of 3.5 extra inches while still being legally permitted to score action-based victory points is, in economic terms, a hostile corporate takeover of the midboard.
Highly leveraged.
Yes. You are artificially inflating your physical footprint without sacrificing your ability to generate primary points. Who is leading this aggressive portfolio? Read the command structure.
The command echelon consists of Captain Dimitri and Titus, leading with the Wardens of Ultramar. He is accompanied by Chief Librarian Tigurius and a librarian named Syphus.
Mechanically speaking, bringing 3 high-value character assets onto a battlefield of this size is a heavy investment. Characters are force multipliers, yes, but they consume a massive portion of the points budget that could otherwise be spent on more boots on the ground. 3 management-level executives on the field simultaneously. Unbelievable overhead costs.
You have a captain whose primary function is violent, localized acquisitions, and 2 librarians whose psychic output is entirely subject to the volatile fluctuations of the warp.
The top-heavy administration, exactly. What are these executives actually managing? What is the core workforce?
They are commanding a core force of assault intercessors and stern guard veterans, sir. And for heavy armor support, they have deployed a repulsor transport and a land raider of the Godhammer pattern.
Ugh. Gloss-brained heroism backed by overpriced armor. Captain Titus is a high-value character asset, sure, but tying up that much capital in a heavy, slow-moving land raider and repulsor transport is incredibly risky.
The land raider Godhammer is a very formidable asset, though.
It's not just a tank, Scribe. Listen to me, citizen. It is a massive physical liability on the board if it is not generating a return on investment through sustained anti-tank fire. It possesses 4 last cannons designed to crack open enemy armor at extreme range. If it spends the game hiding, or worse, firing those multi-million credit lasers at cheap infantry, it is a failed asset.
And the repulsor, sir?
We will get to that tragic misallocation of funds shortly. Turn the page. What manner of Xenos fiscal irresponsibility are they facing?
Right away. The Necrons are deploying the new Cursed Legion detachment from the 500 World Supplement. Their detachment rule is called Cold Fervor.
Read the mechanic, exactly as it is written.
It stipulates that if a non-destroyer or non-Statan unit is destroyed, the entire army gains a +2 bonus to their strength characteristic for all weapons for the remainder of the turn.
I need to click my lighter just to calm my nerves. Click, click. Do you hear that, citizen? An insurance payout for dead employees. That is exactly what Cold Fervor is. You sacrifice your expendable, base-level laborers, your Canoptech scarabs or flayed ones, and in return, the corporate entity receives a massive temporary surge in market power.
The listener might not fully grasp why a +2 strength bonus is so devastating, sir.
Then explain it to them, Scribe. Do your job.
Yes, sir. To clarify the mechanics, in this system, the success of an attack hinges on comparing the weapon's strength against the target's toughness. If strength equals toughness, the attack wounds on a roll of 4 or higher. If strength is greater, it wounds on a 3. If strength is double the toughness, it wounds on a 2.
Right, so by artificially inflating the strength of the entire army by 2 points, weapons that normally struggle to dent heavy infantry suddenly tear through them with statistical ease. A standard-issue gas flare jumping from strength 4 to strength 6 suddenly begins wounding Space Marine intercessors, who possess a toughness of 4 on a roll of 3 instead of a 4.
It is a massive swing in probability.
It turns standard-issue accounting software into weaponized market manipulation. It subsidizes losses with extreme kinetic violence. Who is the CEO of this macabre enterprise?
The Necron leadership is spearheaded by the new Necrosor Amatar, who possesses the Fights First operational keyword. He is supported by a Catacomb command barge with the destroyer Arc Enhancement, a Technomancer, and a Locust Destroyer Lord.
Fights First. A structural monopoly on the combat phase. If you charge him, you attempt to initiate a hostile takeover of his position. He interrupts your legal right to initiate violence. It causes complete tactical paralysis. You spend resources to close the distance, only to have your assets liquidated before they can swing their chainswords.
It acts as a severe deterrent to melee engagement, sir.
What is the rest of their localized asset sheet?
The core forces include Scorpec destroyers, Locust heavy destroyers, standard Locust destroyers, multiple units of flayed ones, Canoptech scarab swarms, a Canoptech reanimator, and a Doomsday Arc for heavy artillery support.
Just rustling these papers makes my skin crawl. Look this list, listener. Look at the structural intent. I summarize this entire Necron operational roster as a penny stock violence portfolio relying heavily on the illusion of durability.
Penny stock violence, sir?
Yes. It is a highly volatile, highly aggressive composition designed to flood the market with cheap, terrifying threats while the apex assets maneuver in the shadows. The flayed ones and scarabs exist merely to trigger the Cold Fervor insurance payout. The destroyers are glass cannons, fragile but utterly lethal. And the Doomsday Arc sits in the back, acting as a massive, singular point of catastrophic failure or success.
The baseline is set, sir. The ledgers are open.
The audit begins in earnest. Move us to quarter 1. Let us analyze turn 1 and what I call the false economy. Read the On Tabletop incident report.
Initiating quarter 1 review. In turn 1, the Necron commander, Michael, utilized his mobility advantages. Specifically, he leveraged the Technomancer's Murder Mind enhancement, which grants an additional 3 inches of movement to its unit.
Naturally.
He used this superior mobility to push units of Flayed Ones and Canoptech Scarab Swarms directly onto the midboard objectives to begin the terraform scoring action immediately.
A predictable early market maneuver. Establishing a cheap physical presence to begin accumulating low-yield dividends. It cost the Necron player almost nothing to throw robotic locusts and flesh-wearing automatons onto the central real estate. The primary scoring economy in this mission format rewards early control. But it's a trap. It is bait designed to force the opponent to overcommit.
The Ultramarines commander, Steve, countered aggressively. He pushed the Repulsor transport directly into the midboard to also perform the terraform action, successfully securing the No Man's Land secondary objective for 5 victory points.
Huh? I am in physical pain. I am clutching my augmetic implants because of the sheer tactical failure I am witnessing. 190 points of concentrated anti-infantry saturation traded for a fleeting primary scoring advantage. 190 points. You understand basic accounting, do you not, Scribe?
The mathematics of the exchange are highly unfavorable, sir. The Repulsor is heavily armed with a multitude of anti-infantry weapon systems, the heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, twin heavy bolters, defensive array stubbers.
Its primary function is to sit at a medium range and generate an overwhelming volume of fire to clear the exact kind of cheap chaff the Necron player just pushed forward. So you understand that pushing a primary crowd control asset into the center of the board on turn 1 is a catastrophic structural failure. Let me explain the armor degradation matrix to you, citizen.
Looking at the raw data sheet, some analysts might argue that Steve's move had merit, sir. The Repulsor possesses a toughness characteristic of 12. In the current edition, Toughness 12 represents a remarkably robust chassis.
A floating fortress built on a foundation of sand.
It is immune to small arms fire and highly resistant to mid-strength plasma or melta weaponry.
A toughness of 12 with a baseline 3+ armor save is a statistical trap. It is a lie sold to naive commanders by the Departmentum Munitorum. We break down the mathematics of why Steve's aggressive forward deployment was entirely fundamentally flawed. You cannot just look at the toughness value in a vacuum. You must look at the threat environment. The Necrons have a doomsday arc. They have locust-heavy destroyers. These assets possess high-yield weaponry, specifically weapons operating at armor penetration -3 or -4.
The armor penetration modifier directly degrades the vehicle's armor save. Against an AP-3 weapon, the Repulsor's 3+ save is worsened by 3 points, becoming a 6+ save.
Exactly, and that single pip of armor save is the difference between operational life and catastrophic death. When you are reduced to a 6+ save, do you know what your actual probability of survival is? Let us strip away the decimals and speak plainly. A 6+ save means you have roughly a 16% chance to deflect the incoming damage.
16.66% to be exact, sir.
It is worse than playing Russian roulette. It is like walking into a Prometheum refinery with a lit flare and hoping the ventilation system blows it out. Steve exposed his primary anti-infantry asset to the entire Necron firing line without any form of screening element.
Screening is a fundamental tabletop tactic. It involves placing cheaper, expendable units like standard intercessors or infiltrators physically in front of your high-value assets. This prevents enemy melee units from charging the tank and forces the enemy to deal with the screen before they can dictate the flow of the board.
But Steve didn't screen. He drove a high-value, lightly armored by heavy anti-tank standards anyway, transport directly into the kill box just to score 5 victory points early in the fiscal quarter. He abandoned the long-term yield for a short-term bonus check. He traded a machine spirit that has served the Emperor for centuries for 5 arbitrary points.
Which brings us directly to the consequences, sir. Quarter 2. Turn 2's Kinetic bankruptcy.
Read the disaster. Let the listener hear the cost of Steve's ignorance.
In turn 2, the Necron Doomsday Arc and the Destroyers targeted the exposed Repulsor. They focused their heavy Gauss weaponry on it and obliterated the vehicle entirely. The vehicle exploded upon destruction.
Of course it did.
The deadly demise mechanic triggered, dealing massive mortal wounds to both sides in the immediate vicinity. The explosion caught several of the Necron units that had pushed into the midboard.
Mortal wounds. Damage that bypasses armor saves entirely. The Repulsor exploded, inflicting area of effect damage. This killed some of the cheap Necron assets nearby, which instantly triggered the cold Fervor rule we discussed earlier. Steve's terrible placement not only lost him a 190-point asset, but his own exploding tank actively buffed the entire Necron army with a +2 to their strength for the remainder of the phase. He subsidized his enemy's offensive output.
The casualties from the explosion were severe. The Canoptech Scarabs took 5 mortal wounds, the Flayed Ones took 4, the Locust Lord took damage. And then, riding the momentum of their temporarily boosted strength characteristic, the Necrons capitalized.
Go on, read the casualty report.
Necrosor Amitar declared a charge against the Assault Intercessors and Captain Titus. Amitar completely wiped out the Assault Intercessor squad in the resulting combat.
A hostile liquidation of the Ultramarines' frontline personnel. But what of Titus?
Captain Titus survived the initial onslaught on a single remaining wound. He then attacked back and single-handedly killed Necrosor Amitar in return.
Ugh, I am slowly exhaling. The sheer incompetence. I am furious at the mathematical illiteracy of both of these commanders. Let us audit Michael's decisions first. Michael, the Necron player, thought he was a tactical genius for pushing his apex melee threats, the Scorpec destroyers, into the open to eradicate Steve's forward staging elements. He committed his heavy melee assets, leaving them completely exposed without cover. He suffered from the exact same delusion Steve did. The illusion of the 3+ save.
The context for infantry is remarkably similar to the vehicles, sir. The Scorpec destroyers rely heavily on their baseline armor save. They do not possess an invulnerable save, a special type of shielding that cannot be degraded by armor penetration.
It is exactly the same structural trap. A 3+ armor save in modern operational theaters is merely an illusion of safety against dedicated anti-elite fire. Michael deployed his destroyers with the brute force arrogance of Astartes Terminators, entirely forgetting that his metallic monstrosities have no innate energy shields. I must conduct a rigorous probability audit on the Necron player's decision to expose his Scorpec destroyers. Read me the defensive matrix of a standard Scorpec destroyer.
A Scorpec destroyer possesses a toughness of 5, an armor save of 3+, 3 wounds per model, and crucially, no invulnerable save.
Thank you. Now let us audit the kinetic threat they were facing downrange. The Ultramarines still had a Godhammer Land Raider operational. It is equipped with 4 Godhammer last cannons. The profile is Strength 12, Armor Penetration -3, Damage D6 +1. Furthermore, Steve utilized the Oath of Moment faction ability.
Oath of Moment is the core doctrine of the Space Marines. In the command phase, the player selects one enemy unit. For the rest of the turn, any attacks directed at that unit benefit from full rerolls to hit. It mathematically ensures that almost every shot fired will strike the target.
Listener, if you want to be a competent auditor of the battlefield, you must understand the exact statistical probability of destruction. I am not going to bore you with a string of endless decimals, but I will give you the brutal summary. When you factor in the ballistic skill of the Land Raider, enhanced by the Oath of Moment rerolls, the last cannons are hitting almost 90% of the time. Because the last cannon is Strength 12 and the Scorpec is only Toughness 5, it wounds almost effortlessly. The AP -3 pushes the Scorpec's armor save to a 6, meaning the armor fails the vast majority of the time.
And finally, the damage output of D6 +1 guarantees that the 3-wound Scorpec is instantly vaporized on almost any damage roll.
Exactly. I have the equation right here. Scribe, verify the math.
Yes, sir. Aggregating those probabilities. The 88.8% hit chance, multiplied by the 83.3% wound chance, multiplied by the 83.3% failed save, multiplied by the 83.3% lethality. It results in approximately a 51.4% chance to instantly delete a Scorpec destroyer per single last cannon shot.
It is slightly better than a coin flip to simply erase a multi-million credit asset from existence with a single pull of the trigger, a coin flip per shot, and the Land Raider fires 4 of them. By leaving them unscreened, by failing to adhere to the patient hunter paradigm, which dictates that fragile melee threats must remain obscured behind terrain until the exact moment of engagement, Michael mathematically guaranteed the eradication of his own heavy melee units.
He failed to use his cheap chaff units to absorb the blow.
He didn't use the Scarabs or the Flayed Ones to absorb the Astartes Alpha Strike. He cleared a path with a surgical scalpel that should have been swept by a cheap broom, ensuring his scalpel was immediately shattered by the opponent's heavy munitions. It is an unpardonable waste of elite combat assets.
It seems both commanders are prone to drastically overcommitting their forces. But, what about the duel in the center? Captain Titus survived the Necrosor's assault and killed him in return. Some viewers of the On Tabletop broadcast hailed that as a massive tactical triumph for the Ultramarines player.
Triumph. It was statistical plot armor. Titus survived that combat phase solely due to his defensive profile, allowing him to randomly cling to 1 wound, which is a mathematical outlier given the volume of attacks Amatar generates. But his offensive output, that is where the rule strictly bailed Steve out of his own poor positioning. Titus possesses a special rule, an anti-character 2+ breakpoint.
The anti-keyword is a highly specialized mechanic. Normally, wound rolls are dictated by the strength versus toughness chart we discussed earlier. However, a weapon with the anti-keyword bypasses that entirely against specific targets.
In this case, against any unit with the character keyword, Titus automatically scores a critical wound on a dice roll of a 2 or higher, regardless of how high the target's toughness might be. He entirely bypassed the defensive matrix of the Necron leader. It is a highly specialized asset, performing exactly as designed, but relying on it to salvage a collapsed front line is not a sustainable business model.
It's, quite a gamble.
It is gambling the company pension fund on a single roulette spin. It is not strategy, it is a desperate reliance on a datasheet crutch. And furthermore, before we continue this audit, can someone in the Departmental Analytica put a work order in to replace the screeching bearing in this ventilation fan? It smells entirely of ozone and burning copper in here. It is degrading my cognitive faculties.
I submitted a form requisition last standard month, sir, but...
And the administratum has replaced my high-grade acephalopod quill ink with this synthetic clumping sludge. Look at this parchment. We are the analytical core of the Imperium, and we are forced to work with bargain bin office supplies. Yes, you, the civilian listener tuning into this broadcast, you think you understand tabletop geometry better than the ledger? Prove it. Post your gloss-brained corrections in the comment section below. Tell me how my probability matrices are wrong. I assure you, your tactical analysis is as defective as this thrice-damn fan. Now, snap back to reality. Back to the audit. We are moving to quarter 3. Turn 3 and the Reanimator Paradox. Read the combat logs.
P proceeding to turn 3, sir. The battle devolves into a brutal exchange of heavy ordnance. The Necron Doomsday Ark repositioned, achieved line of sight, and opened fire with its main cannon, completely vaporizing the Ultramarine Stern Guard veterans. Furthermore, the Locust Lord engaged the Ultramarines' command structure and successfully killed Chief Librarian Tigurius.
A severe loss of middle management. The Astartes command structure is crumbling under the attrition. The Stern Guard were supposed to be the anvil, and Tigurius was supposed to be the psychic shielding. Without them, the Ultramarines are bleeding assets. How does Steve attempt to balance the ledger?
Stave ordered a direct counterattack. He positioned the Land Raider Godhammer, locked onto the Necron support lines, and fired its last cannons directly into the Canoptech Reanimator, successfully destroying it in a single volley.
I am tapping my data slate impatiently. Can you hear it? Tap, tap, tap. I am astounded by the Necron commander's sheer lack of spatial awareness. You don't put a frontline trauma ward in front of an anti-tank laser. It's a fundamental violation of medical and military protocol.
To provide context on the Necron player's intent, the Canoptech Reanimator is designed to heal friendly units. Mechanically, it projects a restorative field. Surely it needed to be close to the front line to be effective. The Necron destroyers were taking heavy damage, and Michael likely felt he needed to support them.
Effective is a highly relative term when your fragile support asset is evaporated by a multi-gigawatt laser beam. Let us analyze the reanimation vector. I want you to break down the restorative math for the listener. Explain to them exactly what the Necron player was hoping to achieve with this fragile machine and why it was a statistical fallacy.
The core identity of the Necron faction is their ability to self-repair. The standard Necron reanimation protocols activate automatically at the end of the player's command phase. A surviving unit rolls 1d3, a 6-sided die halved, and restores that many lost wounds.
And the Reanimator.
The Canoptech Reanimator emits an enhancing aura. If a friendly unit is within its operational range, typically 3 inches, it adds an additional 1d3 to the reanimation roll.
Correct. So let us look at the mathematical expectation. The absolute maximum expected yield is roughly 4 wounds restored per turn. 1d3 plus 1d3 averages out to about 4 wounds. If we apply this to the Scorpec destroyers, which have 3 wounds each, this multi-million credit support asset is restoring roughly 1.3 Scorpec models per engagement cycle.
Restoring slightly more than a single model per turn does not sound like a highly efficient return on investment, especially given the sheer volume of fire the Ultramarines can produce.
It is not efficient. It is a massive net deficit. This is the paradox I'm trying to highlight. Let us compare this meager 4-wound healing output against the kinetic output of the Ultramarines. Based on our previous calculations regarding the Land Raider-less cannons and the surviving bolter fire on the board, The Astartes gunline outputs approximately 10.59 wounds per turn of high-quality damage.
10.59.
We have a restorative yield of 4 wounds and an incoming damage yield of almost 11 wounds. That is a net operational deficit of negative 6.59 wounds per turn. It is a war of attrition. The Necron commander mathematically cannot win, even with the Reanimator functioning perfectly.
So deploying the Reanimator to support the Vanguard was a mistake simply because it couldn't out-heal the sheer damage output of a Godhammer Land Raider.
That is only the first half of the paradox, Greg. The second half is what I call the unit wipe clause. This is the most crucial mechanic to understand when auditing a Necron opponent. Reanimation protocols possess a critical mechanical prerequisite. The unit must actually survive the phase to reanimate. If a unit is reduced to 0 models, the protocols immediately fail. Dead units do not reanimate. If Steve directs enough concentrated fire to completely eradicate the 6-man Scorpic unit in a single volley, the activation is voided. 0 healing.
And the Reanimator's aura requires proximity. To buff the melee units, it must walk behind them. But the Reanimator has a relatively frail defensive profile. It possesses a toughness of 6 and a standard 3+ armor save. It is a tall, spindly model that is incredibly difficult to hide behind obscuring terrain.
Frail is an understatement. By advancing it out from behind cover to support a Vanguard that was already mathematically guaranteed to die under the weight of last cannon fire, the Necron commander merely presented the Astartes Land Raider with a perfectly viable, highly valuable secondary target. Steve utilized the Godhammer-less cannons to immediately eradicate the exposed Reanimator, permanently collapsing the Necron's localized healing matrix for the remainder of the engagement.
Total loss of the asset.
Michael traded a long-term logistical asset for absolutely 0 short-term gain. He moved a medical tent into the direct line of sight of an artillery battery. It is financial suicide on a tabletop. Move to Quarter 4. Let us examine the fallout in Turn 4's zombie loop.
Accessing Turn 4 logs, the overall state of the board shifts dramatically. The Necrons, commanded by Michael, score heavily on their primary objectives this turn. They achieve a massive 12-point swing.
12 points. Read how they managed that.
This occurs because several surviving Necron units, specifically the flayed ones and leftover destroyers, managed to reanimate just enough models to physically touch the objective markers and claim them via the terraform action. Meanwhile, the Necron destroyers successfully wipe out the standard Astartes intercessor squads that were attempting to hold the flanks. Steve is forced to utilize his heaviest assets, the Land Raider and the heavy intercessors, to frantically hunt down the remaining destroyers and the flayed ones.
I need a long, slow drink of this terrible recap. Just give me a moment to process the sheer inefficiency of Steve's countermeasures. Welcome to the Zombie Loop, listener. This is the economic reality of fighting the Necron faction when you have fundamentally mismanaged your assets. You pay for the same real estate twice because you failed to close the account the first time.
The concept of the zombie loop pertains to the action economy and the primary scoring mechanics. In the late stages of a tabletop simulation, holding the physical markers on the board is the only reliable way to generate victory points. The Necrons excel at this because even a single surviving model can contest a point. If you do not completely eradicate the unit, it grows back, stepping onto the marker and stealing the points.
Exactly. It is a cascading failure of the kinetic chain. In Turn 4, Steve is forced into a corner. He is paying what I call a premium point cost to eliminate low-tier threats. He is firing highly expensive, mathematically inefficient Godhammer-less cannons weapons designed to crack heavy tank armor, weapons that cost a premium to include in your army roster at 3-wound infantry and decaying, 1-wound flayed ones. Why? Because he lost his repulsor transport in Turn 1.
The absence of the repulsor fundamentally alters the Ultramarines' damage profile. The repulsor was Steve's primary anti-infantry saturation platform. It carried the high-volume, mid-strength weaponry perfectly tailored to sweep away large volumes of low-toughness Necron infantry without wasting the heavy anti-tank assets.
Because Steve flippantly threw that asset away for 5 early victory points, his macro strategy has structurally cracked. He lacks the sheer volume of shots required to trigger the unit wipe clause on the Necrons. Opportunity cost, listener. When a 250-point tank is forced to shoot its primary weapons at a 15-point model, the player who owns the 15-point model is winning that transaction.
It is a terrible exchange rate.
Steve can kill 2 destroyers with the last cannons, but the third survives, reanimates, and steals the terraform points. He can kill 4 flayed ones with his heavy bolters, but the 5th survives, reanimates, and controls the objective. The zombie loop. He is caught in a cycle of perpetual partial elimination, allowing the Necrons to constantly regenerate, bleed his attention, and dictate the primary scoring economy. The Necrons are dictating the market, and Steve is just reacting.
It seems Steve's early aggression has left him completely devoid of the proper tools for late-game board control. The score reflects this heavily in Michael's favor as we enter Quarter 5. The Necrons have established a commanding lead on the primary scoreboard.
Quarter 5. Turn 5's Desperation Matrix. The final fiscal quarter, where struggling companies execute highly questionable mergers just to avoid declaring bankruptcy. Read the final maneuvers.
In Turn 5, Steve and the Ultramarines are definitively losing the attrition war. The Necron Doomsday Arc unleashes a devastating volley across the board, knocking the mighty Land Raider Godhammer down to a mere 2 remaining wounds. It is barely operational.
Hanging on by a thread.
Realizing his objective control has completely collapsed and he cannot win on primary points, Steve pivots his entire macro strategy. He expends one of his precious command points to activate the New Order stratagem.
A tactical audible. A drastic shift in corporate policy. Command points are a finite resource, generated slowly over the course of the game. Spending 1 in the final turn to discard your objective is the ultimate admission of prior failure.
He discards his current, unachievable tactical objective and randomly draws a new one from his secondary objective deck. He draws Assassination, which awards a flat 5 victory points for destroying an enemy character model. Recognizing this as his absolute only path to remain mathematically competitive on the ledger, Steve turns the battered, smoking Land Raider and declares that every remaining weapon system will fire upon the Necron Catacomb command barge.
I have to chuckle. I really do. Desperation is just math performed under duress, listener. Steve has abandoned all pretense of battlefield control. He is attempting a decapitation strike to artificially inflate his secondary points before the final audit closes. Let us analyze this final desperate gambit. What is the defensive profile of the Catacomb command barge?
The Catacomb command barge is a formidable hover chassis. It possesses a toughness of 8, 9 total wounds, and most importantly, a 4+ invulnerable save.
A 4+ invulnerable save. This is the crucial data point that separates amateur hour from professional auditing. Steve is relying on his Godhammer-less cannons to perform the primary anti-tank duties. But against an invulnerable save, the less cannon's massive armor penetration of -3 is rendered completely irrelevant. An invulnerable save is an energy shield. It cannot be degraded. The Necron commander will always save exactly 50% of successful wounds, regardless of how powerful the incoming weapon is. So how did the primary barrage perform?
The logs show that Steve fired the 4 Godhammerless cannons. After the hit rolls, wound rolls, and the Necron invulnerable saves, Steve only inflicted 7 total damage. The command barge survived the primary barrage and was left clinging to structural integrity with exactly 2 wounds remaining.
The primary decapitation strike failed. The high-yield anti-tank weapons were mathematically blunted by the invulnerable shield. This forced Steve into a Hail Mary play. He had to rely on a secondary, statistically inefficient weapon system mounted on the hull to secure the final 2 damage and the 5-point swing. He was forced to fire the Land Raider's twin heavy bolter array at a toughness 8 target. Dictate the exact probability matrix for this desperation play, Scribe. Show them the numbers.
The twin heavy bolter array produces exactly 3 attacks. The probability of a successful hit based on a ballistic skill of 3+ is a 2/3 success rate. Next, the wound probability. The weapon is strength 5, firing against the barge's toughness of 8. Based on the wound chart, this means it only successfully wounds on a roll of a 5 or a 6, which is a 1 in 3 base probability.
But it possesses the twin-linked keyword. This represents twin weapon barrels firing in tandem, allowing the user to re-roll any failed wound rolls. This alters the math significantly. It mitigates the low base probability and brings the successful wound rate up to roughly 55%. Continue.
Finally, the armor save. The heavy bolter has a minor armor penetration of -1. This pushes the command barge's standard 3+ armor save to a 4+. Because the AP is only -1, it doesn't trigger the invulnerable save, but it still results in a standard 50% failure rate for the armor.
So we calculate the expected number of failed saves from a 3-shot heavy bolter array requiring exactly 2 damage to succeed against a heavy vehicle. 3 shots, filtered through the hit probability, the twin-link wound probability, and the 50% armor save probability. When you crunch those numbers, the expected number of failed saves was exactly 0.55. Do you understand what that means, listener? It was a literal coin flip. Slightly worse than a coin flip, statistically speaking. Steve's entire fiscal quarter, the fate of the Macragge simulation, the 500 jelly beans, it all rested on a fractional probability of a secondary weapon system.
The psychology of tabletop games often comes down to these moments. Players will execute terrible macro strategies for 3 hours, only to have the entire game validated or invalidated by a single roll of the dice in turn 5. And the result of this roll?
Steve spiked the roll. The dice favored the desperate. He successfully forced the failed saves, dealt the final 2 points of damage with a heavy bolter, destroyed the Catacomb command barge, and secured the 5 victory points for assassination. This last-second injection of capital skyrocketed his final score to 84 points. He snatched statistical viability from the jaws of absolute defeat. But was it enough? Bring us to the post-audit. Read the final tally. Let us see the ghost of turn 1.
The final score of the engagement, after tallying all primary and secondary points. The Necrons, commanded by Michael, scored 85 points. The Ultramarines, commanded by Steve, scored 84 points. The Necron commander won the engagement by a single victory point.
A single point.
Yes. The battle report notes that this final decisive point was secured because a single one-wound Necron flayed one, which the commanders affectionately named Clarence during the broadcast, managed to survive on the mid-board objective. It completed a final terraform action before the end of the game, securing the final victory points needed to push Michael over the edge.
I am slamming this file shut right now. The audit is complete, and the sheer absurdity of the outcome is giving me heartburn. 1 point. One gloss-brained, decaying robot decided the fiscal quarter. One rusted, broken automaton draped in flayed skin named Clarence was the difference between an Ultramarines victory and a Necron triumph.
Yeah.
And do you want to know the most infuriating part of his entire exhaustive analysis, listener? It's all because of turn 1.
Turn 1. The tactical data indicates the flayed one scored the point in turn 5. The final score was decided at the very end of the simulation.
Do not be obtuse, scribe. We must bring this entire intellectual audit full circle. I'm going to run a predictive simulation on the exact kinetic potential Steve forfeited when he flippantly threw away his repulsor transport in the first 20 minutes of the engagement. I call this the ghost volley matrices. I will prove to you mathematically that Steve lost this game before the first casualty was even removed from the board.
I have the predictive matrices ready to populate.
Good. Input these operational parameters. We're assuming a duration of 3 battle rounds where the repulsor sits safely in the back line, anchored next to the stern guard veterans, establishing what military doctrine calls interlocking fields of fire. This means setting up a kill zone where multiple units cover each other's blind spots. We are targeting the Necron destroyer cult baseline and the flayed ones. First, calculate the repulsor's kinetic output per turn. As we established, it is not a tank. It is a mobile saturation fire platform designed to drown elite infantry in forced armor saves. Between the heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, the defensive arrays, and the heavy bolters, the repulsor outputs approximately 6.61 successful, unsaved wounds per turn against standard Necron infantry profiles.
Logged. 6.61 wounds per turn, accounting for standard cover saves and Necron armor.
Now, add the output of the 10-man Stern Guard veteran squad that Steve also mismanaged by letting them get caught in the open. Operating from a static, optimized firing line, utilizing their devastating wounds mechanic, which, for the listener's benefit, allows critical wound rolls to completely bypass all armor and invulnerable saves, translating directly into unavoidable damage, they output approximately 3.33 wounds per turn against the same targets.
Adding the Stern Guard output to the simulation, that brings the combined firebase total to roughly 9.94 expected wounds per turn.
Exactly. Let us round that to 10 wounds for the sake of simple arithmetic. Over the 3 turns that this firebase should have survived, anchored in the rear echelon, turns 2, 3, and 4, they would have generated approximately 29.82 wounds of raw anti-infantry output, nearly 30 wounds.
That is a highly significant volume of damage. For context, a standard unit of flayed ones consists of 10 models, each with 1 wound.
It is the mathematical absolute of victory. I definitively prove, right here in the ledger, that this missing volume of fire mathematically deletes 40 to 50 flayed ones from the table. Do you hear me, Steve, wherever you are in the galaxy? Clarence would not have existed in turn 5. The Necron reanimation protocols would have been permanently voided by turn 4 because you would have pushed their units past the unit wipe threshold. You would possess the sheer volume of dice required to eradicate the chaff, leaving Michael's apex assets to be systematically dismantled by your Land Raiders' last cannons. You lost the game in turn 1 by failing to establish a backline anchor. You committed your primary anti-infantry assets to a false economy, chasing 5 early points, and you paid the ultimate price in turn 5. A single point. A single jelly bean.
The mathematics are indeed unforgiving. The audit reveals a cascading series of compounding errors from both commanders. Steve's failure to screen and establish a firebase allowed Michael to dominate the midboard. Michael's failure to hide his reanimator and destroyers almost cost him the game. It resulted in a statistically anomalous, albeit dramatic, finish.
The archives are sealed on the McCrog Theater simulation. The numbers do not lie, even if commanders who generate them are blindingly incompetent. The play on tabletop incident is resolved.
Shall I file the report into the Deep Archives, Senior Auditor?
Yes. File it under instructional failures. Listen, the relentless background noise of the administratum is fading. The clacking of the cogitators, the stamping of the wax seals, the endless drone of a trillion scribes calculating a trillion localized tragedies. It all goes quiet eventually. Only the low, rhythmic, screeching hum of this defective ventilation fan remains. I want you to think about Clarence, that single decaying, single-minded automaton, standing there on a ruined, crater-plocked objective marker, surrounded by the burning multi-million credit wreckage of Godhammer land raiders and doomsday arcs. He is the perfect metaphor for this entire forsaken galaxy, is he not? Just another broken gear in a dying machine, fighting over irradiated dirt that will be dead long after my ledger is finally closed. The commanders play their games, they wager their jelly beans, they throw away lives and machinery for the thrill of the maneuver. But in the end, the math always wins, and the math says we are all just depreciating assets grinding down to zero. If you appreciate the unvarnished truth of the data slate, if you prefer the cold comfort of a perfectly balanced equation over the lies of heroic propaganda, then for the love of the Empire, tap that like button and hit subscribe. Ensure your data protocols are permanently linked to this frequency. We will continue to drag the truth out of the shadows, one battle report at a time. Dismissed. Pay your tithes, citizens.